Satnam Aloha. So, welcome to my new series called The Phoenix Files. And this is about historical figures who embody the sleeping phoenix consciousness. And these are the souls that rise after the fire. So, tonight we're going to begin a story that stretches way, way back, more than 600 years. And strangely, this feels incredibly relevant to the time that we're in right now. So Joan of Arc, she's inspired artists for generations. Songwriters like Leonard Cohen, Kate Bush, The Smiths, OMD, they've all written songs about Joan of Arc. Many, many others. But the story behind the music is even more extraordinary. She was 17 years old. She led armies. She crowned a king. She was betrayed and abandoned by a man that she saved. She was interrogated by 60 trained theologians. She outwitted them all. And then she was burned alive. So first she was called a heretic, and then centuries later she was called a saint. So the same church that condemned her to death later canonized her. So this isn't just history. This is about power. This is a story about truth and about what happens when the world tries to destroy something that it can't understand. But Joan of Arc was not the beginning. Before Joan of Arc were the Cathars. 100 years earlier in southern France, they lived a spiritual truth that the church could not tolerate. They believed in a direct connection to the divine. No priest necessary, right? No mediator necessary. No institution between the soul and the divine. And they too were called heretics, and they too were hunted and burned alive. And the church believed that they had erased them all, extinguished them all. But archetypes never die, right? They return. They return. This consciousness is returning. And 100 years later, after the Cathars, a teenage girl appears in armor. And she claims she hears the voices of saints. She doesn't ask the church for permission. She doesn't need the institution to validate her. She knows, right? It's the same frequency as the Cathars, the same threat to institutional power. And the Cathars left behind a prophecy. I did a whole video on this, like Priestess in Hiding. A lot of people on my fractal, a lot of women on my fractal have past life memories, Cathars. Go down the information box. You can click and watch that video and watch the little documentary too. So before the flames consumed the last known Cathar in 1321, he said in 700 years, we will return, the Cathars will return. Do the math, 1321 plus 700, 2021. So, Joan of Arc, the seed was planted during the Cathar times, right? The first flower was Joan of Arc that we know of, and now the forest is growing during this time period. And the phoenix is rising, and not as one martyr on a pyre, right? But as millions of awakened souls, including you watching this. So every person remembering, starting to remember what it means to serve the divine. Not the institution, not the church, but to live by your own inner authority. You're starting to remember what it means to live by your own inner authority. So not looking to external permission, not looking to experts, not making someone else's voice more important than your own, listening to your own inner authority, to stand in your own truth, even when the world calls it dangerous. So the Cathars returned Joan returned, and this time the light's too bright. The frequency's too high on the planet. We're coming out of the Kali Yuga, the age of darkness. There's too many of us to burn. Okay, so let's start off with a powerful quote. Mark Twain. I love Mark Twain. So he actually wrote a whole biography on Joan of Arc. He spent 12 years researching Joan of Arc, and then he spent 2 years writing the book. And he actually considered this his best work. He himself considered it his best work, even though the critics didn't like it. Big surprise, right? The experts don't like it. So here's the quote. So just like close your eyes and listen to these words. When we reflect that her century was the brutalest, the wickedest, the rottenest in history since the darkest ages, we are lost in wonder at the miracle of such a product from a soil. The contrast between her and her century is the contrast between day and night. She was truthful when lying was the most common speech of men. She was honest when honesty had become a lost virtue. She was a keeper of promises when the keeping of a promise was expected of no one. She was honorable in an age which had forgotten what honor was. She was a rock of convictions in a time when men believed in nothing and scoffed at all things. She was unfailingly true in an age that was false to the core. She was all of these things in an age when crime was the common business of lords and princes. Mark Twain. So, sound familiar, right? This isn't just a description of Joan. This is a mirror of this time that we're in now. He was describing the 15th century, but he's also describing what we're living in now. Lying as common speech, honesty and honor as lost virtues, promises broken before the words even leave the mouth, not protecting the innocent, not standing up for the innocent. Crime is the business of the powerful and the ones that rule over us. Joan of Arc wasn't burned because she was wrong. She was burned because she was the contrast of that age. She was the day in the middle of the night. She was the truth in the middle of the lies. She was purity in the middle of the rot. And that is why she matters now. So let's get into her life, a brief history of her life here. Well, she was born in 1412 in a small village in northeastern France. She was the daughter of peasants. She couldn't read or write, wasn't educated. And Joan of Arc was not actually called Joan of Arc in her lifetime. The Arc part came from her father's name, Jacques d'Arc, right? So essentially it means Joan, daughter of Jacques d'Arc. In medieval France, the last name, the surname, they're not fixed the way that they are now. People were often identified by who their father is, their village, or their occupation. And so why is Merlin here? Well, Merlin had a prophecy, right? And the prophecy from a medieval tradition associated with Merlin. So there's a popular prophecy circulating in France that said France would first be ruined by a woman and later saved by a virgin from the borders of Lorraine. Merlin. So the woman who ruined France was often interpreted as Queen of Bavaria. So she signed a bunch of treaties, throwing France under the bus, basically, and favoring England. And the virgin who would save France would later be Joan of Arc. So medieval Europe was already primed. They were already primed with stories of a young female savior who would appear in France. So when Joan stepped forward, when she finally stepped forward as a teenager, people just didn't see a peasant girl, right? They saw the pattern that they already knew through this prophecy. Okay, so we have to talk about the zeitgeist at the time, what was going on. Well, there was the 100-Year War between England and France. And it wasn't one continuous battle. You can see, right, from 1337 to 1453. So really it was 116 years, but they called it a 100-Year War. So during that time, much of northern France was occupied by England. So the French agricultural and towns were repeatedly destroyed by the English. And nobles fought with each other internally, and the French monarchy nearly collapsed. And France was in a civil war with it, right? The France itself. So in 1420, a treaty was signed that shocked the entire country of France. And so the treaty was basically declared the English king at that time would inherit the French throne. So this meant the legitimate French heir, right, the next in line for the crown, the Dauphin, the future Charles VII, was effectively disinherited through this treaty. So from the English perspective, like France was already done. They already conquered it. They already won it. So this is where Joan enters the story, right? So Joan of Arc appears in 1429. And you have to remember this war has been going on for 92 years already. So France is exhausted. They're divided. They're fighting amongst one another, and they're losing badly. So the English controlled huge territories in France, and this French king had not been crowned yet, the Dauphin. So many believe France was done. They're finished. They're hopeless about France coming back. And that's the moment that the 17-year-old peasant girl shows up saying that she's been sent by God to save the country. Right? So let's go back to her at 13 years old. 13 years old. So she hasn't stepped forward yet. So 1425, she's in her father's garden. It's in the afternoon. She hears a voice. And it came from the direction of the church. And it came with great light, great light. And she later testified at her trial. I heard this voice to the right towards the church. I saw a great light. And the voice identified itself as Archangel Michael. And he wasn't alone. Over time, two more voices appeared, St. Catherine and St. Margaret. And what they told her at first was they gave her some guidance, right? Be good, go to church. But the message just started to grow. And later they told her France was in ruins, and the Dauphin, the son of the king, was not crowned. And so she was chosen, right? They were choosing her to go save the kingdom. So she must go to the Dauphin. That was the instructions they gave her. And she must help him reclaim his throne. And her response, as you can imagine, a 13-year-old peasant girl, right, is being told to go find the king, and then you're going to lead an army. So she cried, and she resisted, and she questioned, but the voices wouldn't stop. They returned again and again, and eventually she stopped fighting them. She obeyed. Right? That's kind of like when your intuition just will not stop about your soul purpose, right? It's not, this is dense, but I can totally relate to this. Okay. So what did she do? Well, she goes to see the Dauphin. So she's 16 years old at this time, And she had been hearing the message, the same message from the voices over and over and over. That's your intuition, over and over and over, same message. Right? She had a mission. She was to go see the Dauphin of France, the uncrowned heir to the throne, and help him save the country. So at this point, France is like desperate, right? The English, they're just brutal. They're just like pounding them, right? They're winning the war. So large parts of the country were under English control. And many people in France said, we're done for, it's over. So here's this teenage girl, and she traveled to a nearby fortress town where the French army was, and she demanded to see the local commander. And so she told him, I've been sent by God to speak to the Dauphin. And the commanders laughed at her, of course, and sent her home, right? But Joan didn't give up. She returned again and again and again. And eventually something about her conviction began to move people. So local supporters helped arrange a journey across enemy territory to go to the Dauphin's court. So the journey itself was dangerous, right? Especially for women, right? They were in great danger to be on their own. So she traveled hundreds of miles through war zones, often at night, disguised in male clothing for protection. And after weeks of travel, she finally arrived at the royal court. So the Dauphin decided to test her. He hid among a crowd of nobles to see if she would recognize him, and Joan walked directly through the room, past the nobles, and approached the Dauphin immediately. She knelt before him and addressed him as the rightful king. So the Dauphin gives her command, right? She goes and she tells him. He doesn't immediately say, okay, here's the army and go lead. He didn't do that at all. First, he tested her, right? He tested her. And he had theologians question her. Church authorities examined her claims. They wanted to know if this young girl claiming divine guidance, was she a fraud? Was she like crazy town, right? Was she a virgin? Was she a heretic? And the obsession with virginity, have you noticed that? Historically, this obsession with virginity. Well, the church believed that no woman could receive, right, a download basically from the divine unless they were a virgin, and that meant they were pure. So for weeks here, she was interrogated by these church scholars, but they found no hearsay in her statements. And they couldn't prove that her visions were false. And France was desperate. They were desperate. So eventually the Dauphin, he made a remarkable decision. He allowed the 17-year-old peasant girl to join the army. So they gave her armor, right, to wear, and a banner, here's a banner, and a small force of soldiers. So she was really there to inspire the army, to give the soldiers the belief that God was on their side. And that belief spread like wildfire. And soldiers who had been demoralized for years, remember they've been fighting for 92 years, began to rally around her. And just her mere presence changed the energy of the army. So she had her first mission, right? Her first mission was clear. She was to break the English siege at Orleans. So at that moment, many of the military leaders thought the city's gone, right? It's already lost. For months, the English had been surrounded it. Food was running out. They were exhausted. And if Orleans fell, the English would control the gateway to southern France, and the war would just be over then. So France itself could disappear as a kingdom. But Joan insisted something different. She said the city would be saved. She was convinced the city would be saved, not someday, but soon. And with months, right? Within months, that's exactly what she would do. She would prove that. So during the fighting, right, Joan carried the banner. There's the banner in the front of the army. She was in the front. And at one point she was struck by an arrow in the shoulder, and right, and she was carried from the battlefield. She was carried off. And if at one point it looked like they were going to fail, the assault will fail. They wouldn't be able to defend it. But later that same day, she returned, right? The banner in her hand. And when the soldiers pulled the arrow out, right? Banner in the hand. And when the soldiers saw her return, they surged forward again. And within days, the English strongholds around the city began to fall. And the siege that lasted for months, it collapsed, right? So what happened at Orleans shocked all of Europe. A war that had dragged on 92 years suddenly began to take a turn. And at the center of it all was this 17-year-old girl carrying a banner into battle. Right, there she is there. Okay, so this was the coronation of the king. This led to the coronation of the king. So the victory at Orleans changed everything. For the first time in years, the French army began to believe. They began to believe that they could win. But Joan said the mission was not finished. She was reminded, the Dauphin, that the message she heard from the angels was that he had to be crowned, right? So he must be crowned the King of France. And that coronation had to happen just outside of Paris at a particular cathedral. And this was deep, deep into enemy-controlled territory just outside of Paris. So most advisors told him the journey's impossible. It's too dangerous. It's too risky. Again, Joan insisted. And once again, the army followed her. So city after city, when they traveled, the city just began to open all its gates. The English and their allies, they started retreating, right? So the momentum of the war had suddenly shifted to France's favor. So in July 1429, the Dauphin entered the cathedral, and there he was crowned King Charles VII of France. And standing beside him was the young girl who made it all possible, Joan of Arc. Okay. The capture. So in May 1430, Joan of Arc was defending a town. The war was not completely over by this point, right? The English and their allies were still fighting to control France. So during a battle outside the city walls, the gates were suddenly closed. And Joan and a small group of soldiers were left outside, surrounded. And she was captured by the Burgundians, right? These were the French allies of the English. This was the division, right? The Civil War. They were like the bad French guys, right? So she was only 18 years old at this point, and she was taken as a prisoner of war. Okay. So the king that she helped place on the throne, he did nothing. He abandoned her. He threw her under the bus, did nothing to rescue her. Instead, she was sold to the English for 10,000 livres. And that's about $3 million or more, right? By today's standards. So it's a lot. So the amount was roughly the ransom price of a high-ranking noble, right? So this meant that they were treating her like a military prize, but they didn't want ransom. They didn't want money from France, the English. They wanted to destroy her legitimacy. Right? So they wanted to prove that the girl who claimed to hear the voice of God was a fraud. Right? Was a fraud. And this is the political problem, right, that they were in. The English had a serious problem with the narrative. Joan had created a powerful narrative that God supported France, that God supported King Charles VII, and that Joan was God's messenger. So if the English wanted to undermine the French king's legitimacy, they had to prove something specific, right? That Joan's visions came from the devil, not God. So they arranged a heresy trial. Because if Joan was proven a heretic, then the coronation of the king becomes immediately, illegitimate. And all her victories look like sorcery or deception. And then the French divine claim collapses. No, God's not on the side of France. So this is why this trial mattered so much historically. So think of it like today, right? Imagine a government spending millions and millions of dollars to obtain a custody of a prisoner in order to run a political show trial designed to destroy their legitimacy, right? So this would be like the government paying millions to extradite a symbolic resistant leader, like let's say Julian Assange, right? In order to publicly discredit them. That was the scale of what was happening with Joan of Arc. Okay, so she was handed over to a French cleric loyal to England, and the trial began in Rouen, France. And immediately legal violations occurred. She was not placed in a church prison as church law required, because, right, it was a trial for heresy. Instead, she was held in an English military prison. She was guarded by male soldiers, not nuns, not females, and she was kept in chains the whole time. She wasn't allowed to go to Mass as well. So later testimony, down the road, like way down the road, it revealed that she endured sexual assault threats and sexual assault attempts from the guards. So this explains one of the heresy accusations against her, that she continued wearing men's clothing, not as rebellion, but as protection. I don't know what they were expecting, right? For her to be wearing a skirt and being side saddle, right? In war and battle. Okay, so the trial began in 1431 in January, and Joan of Arc was only 19 years old then. So she faced a panel about 60 theologians, lawyers, and church officials. And most of them were trained scholars from the University of Paris. And Joan, she couldn't read or write. She had no legal counsel. So she was interrogated for months. So the goal of the trial was not simply to judge her, it was to destroy her authority, destroy her inner authority. So if the church could prove that Joan was a heretic, then everything connected to her world would collapse. Her visions, her victories, even the coronation of the king that she helped place on the throne. So the judges focused on one central question: where does your authority come from, right? Does it come from the church or from the voices she claimed to hear directly from God? And this was the real threat that Joan represented. Not a military threat, but a spiritual one, a spiritual threat. Because if a teenage peasant girl could speak directly with the divine, then the whole institutional system, right? Authority was at risk. The church was at risk of losing its power. So the question, right, that could have condemned her, and during the trial, the judges asked Joan a question designed as a trap, a theological trap. If she answered yes, she could be accused of presumption. If she answered no, she would be admitting that she was not in God's grace. So the question, the tricky question here, are you in God's grace? So for the judges, this was the perfect trap, right? Either answer yes or no would condemn her. But Joan answered in a way that no one expected. She said, if I'm not, may God put me there. And if I am, may God keep me there. If I'm not, may God put me there. And if I am, may God keep me there. So the courtroom fell silent. Some of the theologians, right, were stunned because the answer was flawless, right? Flawless. So a 19-year-old peasant girl had just outmaneuvered the most educated theologians in France. So why this matters, this is the moment where the audience understands, right? They're not dealing with an ignorant girl. They're dealing with someone who possessed a clarity of spirit that they couldn't control. Okay, so the charges against Joan. So after months of interrogation, the court compiled a list of accusations, and these charges were designed to prove that Joan was a heretic. So, among them, claiming she received divine guidance from God and the saints, refusing to submit her visions to the authority of the church, saying that God had chosen her mission, wearing men's clothing, refusing to abandon the voices she believed that were guiding her. And then there were dozens of accusations, but they basically condensed it to 12 formal articles of heresy. So in the end, the trial wasn't really about military actions. It was about this authority, right? The authority. Who has the right to speak for the divine? The church or the individual soul? And Joan's answer never changed. She said the voices guiding her came from Archangel Michael, Saint Catherine, and Saint Margaret. And she refused to deny them. But after months and months of interrogation, the judges increased their pressure on Joan. They threatened her with execution by burning. They demanded that she renounce her visions, and they insisted she submit completely to the authority of the church. Right? So she was exhausted, alone, and surrounded by hostile judges, right? And the predatory guards, the male guards, and she's chained the whole time. She finally agreed to sign a document, and the document said that she would renounce her voices and submit to the church. She was promised her life would be spared, but something happened shortly afterwards. She put the men's clothing back on, right? She put the men's clothing back on. And when she was questioned about this, she said the guards had taken away the women's clothing she had been given. So she returned to the only clothes available to her. So the judges immediately declared this as a relapse into heresy under church law. And a relapsed heretic could be executed. The other thing is the men's clothing. She would tie the men's clothing tight, so it would be really difficult for those guards to get her clothes off, right? So it was about, she was protecting her chastity, right? Her purity. So the verdict was now inevitable. This refusal sealed her fate. Sealed her fate. So the execution. So on May 30th, 1431, 1431, she was taken to a marketplace in Rouen. She was 19 years old. She was 19 years old, and a wooden stake had been prepared. So there were about, by some accounts, there were as many as 10,000 people that filled the square. And the church officials read the sentence. Joan was declared a relapsed heretic, and under church law, the punishment was death by fire. So later, it said witnesses said that Joan asked for a cross, and an English soldier made one from 2 pieces of wood and gave it to her, and she held it as she was tied to the stake. So as the flames rose, she repeatedly cried out for the name of Jesus. And later the executioner reported that he feared he had condemned himself for burning a holy woman. Others had said too, like afterwards, there was this like eerie calm in the crowd, and there were people weeping, right? Weeping in the crowd. And then the executioner went for forgiveness. He knew, he said he burned a holy woman. And so the authorities, the church, believed the fire would end the story, but instead the fire made her immortal. Witnesses later said that Joan asked for that cross, right? And as the fire was lit, thick smoke from the wood pile around her, and many historians believe that she lost consciousness from smoke inhalation before the flames reached her. And when the fire finally died down, right, the executioner condemned himself for burning a holy woman. Okay. So 25 years later, right, the church is oopsie, right? They declared the trial invalid, one of the most dramatic reversals in history. Joan of Arc was executed in 1431, but the story didn't end there, right? So 25 years later, the church reopens the case. Witnesses from the original trial were questioned. Soldiers, clergy, people had known her personally. And then in 1456, the church declared the original trial was corrupt and invalid, and Joan of Arc was officially cleared of heresy. Her name was restored, and then 1920, this is what the church does, right? They love you, they hate you, they kill you, then they canonize you, right? So they canonized her as a saint in 1920. So the same institution that condemned her eventually declared her holy, right? So the fire didn't destroy her story, it amplified her story. So why does this matter historically, right? When Joan appeared in 1429, France was close to collapse, The English controlled all the northern parts of France. Many believed, right, it was over. So she didn't live to see the end of the war. Right, she did not see the end of the war. That just only 22 years later, after her execution, the war was finally over. France survived. So her appearance marked the turning of a tide, even though she didn't live to see the outcome, which totally fits with her human design chart that we're going to look at. Right, so this would be a good time for you. If you're listening on your phone, put it on pause, have a couple deep breaths, and then get your chart out and see if there's any similarities between you and Joan of Arc. Okay. Okay, so to understand Joan of Arc, we've got to zoom out, right? Because this goes far beyond the story of just one person. She's an archetype now. And we want to look at the cycle of consciousness humanity was living through at this time. So she was in the cross of consciousness, these are the global cycles, right? So that was 1203 to 1614, just before the cross of planning, and that's what we're in now. This is the last year of the cross of planning, and then we're moving into the cross of the sleeping phoenix that starts in 2027. That's why we're seeing so much chaos. There's a turning of the wheel that's happening. Okay, so Joan of Arc lived through the cross of consciousness. And remember, the Cathars were here in the 1300s, so they're part of the same cycle. So it was an era when humanity was beginning to awaken to the direct awareness of the divine. So people began to question institutions during this time. They begin to question authority. They begin to question who has the right to speak for God. And can the human being connect directly with the divine, or do we need spiritual authority to come through our institutions? So mystics at this time started to appear everywhere, visions, prophecy, inner revelation. And institutions responded with something else, right? Control, interrogation, doctrine. So this is the same cycle that gave rise to the Cathars in southern France. And the Cathars believed something very dangerous to the church. They believed that the human soul could connect directly to the divine, gnosis. No priest required, no institution required. And this belief threatened the entire structure of medieval power. And the church responded with fire. The Cathars were hunted, their cities were destroyed, many were burned alive. A century later, Joan of Arc appears, a teenage girl who says she hears the voices of God directly. She doesn't ask the church for permission. She acts, which is exactly what makes her so dangerous. Not as a soldier, but a symbol of direct spiritual authority. That was the real threat with her, right? So we have to look, and I've talked about this before, locks and keys. So the locks always stay the same, right? With all of these, cross of rulership, consciousness, cross of planning, and then the new sleeping phoenix. These all stay the same. These are the foundation, right? They're locks. And they correlate to the certain gates in the human design chart, right? Certain energies. So these locks are the foundations of that era, and the keys are the forces that test or activate those foundations. So during the cross of consciousness, right, we still have this, the 25, 46, 10, 15. This is the innocence of the spirit, the 25, the love of the body, the 46. The 10 is the authentic behavior of the self, and the 15 is the love of humanity. And the keys, 63 is doubt, 64 is confusion, and then the 5 is timing, and then the 35 is experience and change. So Joan's life sits directly inside this pattern. So look at the tension between the 25 and the 63. That's the key that opens up the 25. The doubt, right? So this is logic. So this is Joan facing the theologians, right? 60 trained scholars trying to trap spiritual authority with logic. Her famous answer about grace shows exactly that collision. So 63 is about logical doubt, and that's exactly what happened in her trial. A young girl comes and claims divine guidance, and 60 scholars try to trap her with logic. That's this right here, that energy. And then the 46, 64, right? This is the body. It's the body as the vessel of spirit, the vessel of your soul. the vehicle of your soul. And 64 is confusion. Joan's very body created confusion for the system. There she is, a teenage girl, a female wearing armor, leading armies, wearing men's clothing in prison to protect herself. The system literally did not know what category to put her in. And this is the ownership, right? Ownership of your body. This too, this energy during this time. And then the 10, right? The 10 here and the 5, lock 10, key 5. This is living in alignment with your authentic self. And so 5 is the rhythm and timing. And Joan came in and completely disrupted the rhythm of the war 92 years later. She appeared suddenly and shifted the whole momentum of the entire conflict. And then finally, the 15 and the 35, this is the love of humanity. And 35 is historical change through experience. So this is war, transformation, upheaval. Joan became a catalyst for change in this 100-year war. So she wasn't just a soldier. She was the expression of the consciousness cycle she was born into. She was an archetype. Her life became the collision point between spiritual innocence and institutional control. And that's why her story so resonates with us, right? Centuries later, because she embodied the tension of this entire era, right? During the cross of consciousness. So if we look at Saturn and Neptune in 0 degrees Aries, this was like a major transit that we just experienced, and that was on February 20th, right? 0 degrees Aries. So this is where the story becomes really relevant today, because something extraordinary is happening in our own time that goes back to Joan of Arc. So the first time in 36 years, Saturn and Neptune are meeting again. And remember, this is even like Aries is the first, look, 0 degrees, right? Aries is the first sign of the zodiac. This is a 185-year cycle, right? Returning, Saturn and Neptune returning to Aries. But Saturn-Neptune conjunctions are 36-year cycles, right? But we're looking at, like it's Aries, we're looking at the larger cycle. So the first time in 36 years, Saturn and Neptune are meeting again in 0 degrees Aries. And in human design, this points to the 25th gate, the 25th gate. And the 25th gate is Joan of Arc's midheaven, her midheaven up in her 10th house, the 25. So this is the archetype of spiritual innocence. It represents the human being's direct relationship with spirit, not churches, not institutions, not filtered through hierarchy, but it's directly lived in the heart. So this gate, 25, is asking a radical question. Now, right now, the radical question is, can you live from spirit even when the world around you does not understand it? Right? Your community, your friends, your family do not understand it. Can you still live by spirit? And Saturn and Neptune meet. These are two different forces, Saturn and Neptune. Saturn represents structure, reality, accountability, consequences, karma, right? And Neptune represents spirit, mysticism, faith, the invisible, right? And Saturn rules the visible. So every time these two planets meet, humanity's asked to confront a profound question. What is real, right? There's been a lot of energy around dissolution of fantasies and illusions. Look at our world. Things are the veil, right? The apocalypse is the great reveal. Things are being revealed. They've always been there, but now they're being revealed. Right? Is spirituality real? Is the invisible world real? Is divine guidance real? Is your intuition real? Right? Is your heart real? Right? Is your soul's impulses, are they real? Or is it all an illusion? Or is it all illusion? So the last cycle, right? I've talked about this in other videos. The last cycle was 36 years ago, and that was 1989. And this is when Saturn and Neptune were conjunct in Capricorn. So Capricorn rules institutions, government, systems, structures of power, outer authority, what makes sense historically. In 1989, do you remember, is the fall of the Berlin Wall. So a global restructuring of systems. And now this new cycle is completely different, right? It's Aries. Saturn, Neptune, and Capricorn was the dissolution, the breakdown of those systems and institutions. This is building. Aries is about building, right? It's about individual identity, your individual identity. It's about individual action. It's about individual sovereignty. So the question shifts from how do institutions organize society, Neptune, Saturn, and Capricorn, to what does the individual stand for? What do you stand for? Right? What do you stand for? And the gate activated here is the 25. This is the gate of innocence. So what's fascinating is to look at the story of Joan of Arc, because she embodied this exact archetype, a person claiming direct spiritual guidance. No proof. I don't need proof. This is what I know. I know without knowing. I just know. It's in my bones. Right? Standing outside of institutional authority, following an inner command, even when it placed her in conflict with the systems, right? But the lessons evolving, right? In Joan's era, spiritual innocence collided with power, and the result with martyrdom. She was burned at the stake. But consciousness evolves. We've evolved in 600 years, right? And now the new cycle doesn't require that you martyr yourself. It requires that you're sovereign and you stand for what you know, not with your head, but with your heart and your soul. Standing in spiritual authority without needing to destroy or be destroyed or prove yourself and defend yourself in that sense, right? Like with logic. So humanity's leaving the cross of planning cycle. And this era has been dominated by institutions, structures, and collective systems. And we're moving towards the sleeping phoenix, right? We're moving here, going up the stairs to the cross of the sleeping phoenix cycle. And so this is where the individual spirit becomes the driving force. So gate 25 is activating the beginning of the Saturn-Neptune cycle, and it's symbolic, right? So it suggests the next 36 years will involve humanity rediscovering something very ancient, the direct relationship between human soul, right? Human soul, your soul, and the divine, right? So the archetype returns not as a historical figure, but the archetype of the spiritual warrior. That's what this is, and that's what who she represents as an archetype, the spiritual warrior, the one who listens to their inner voice, the one who refuses to abandon truth when the systems push back, the one that refuses to lie in a world that's filled with lies, right? The one that keeps the faith, keeps their faith, even if everyone around them has no faith whatsoever, right? This is about standing as a community of one if you have to. We all have to face our fears of aloneness and loneliness. That's the greatest fear of the tribal consciousness when you're in the tribal consciousness. It's like being alone and not within a group. You have to stand. You have to stand as a community of one. You have to stand for your convictions, right? The 3420 is coming online, right? During the cross of the sleeping phoenix in 2027. So the evolution is Joan of Arc represents the old expression of that archetype. And the new expression of this archetype is different. It's not martyrdom, it's not persecution, it's spiritual sovereignty. Living your truth without needing to be burned for it, without needing to be punished for it. Right? So if we look back at astrology, Saturn was conjunct Pluto in Gemini in 1415. What does that mean? It means that Gemini governs testimony, questioning, messengers, speaking, communicating, trials, and interrogation. And when Saturn and Pluto meet in Gemini, communication becomes dangerous and powerful. This is during Joan of Arc's time. Words can challenge authority, right? They can expose power structures. They can ignite wars. They can threaten institutions, right? This is like Luther, right? Translated the Bible from Latin to English. The printing press was so dangerous. And what do we have today? We've got the printing press on steroids. It's called the internet. So Joan of Arc was literally a Gemini archetype. Her entire story revolves around her voice, right? My voice has told me. She says that in her trial. Her voice moved armies. Her voice crowned a king. And ultimately, her voice was put on trial. Right? So Joan of Arc wasn't burned for violence. She was burned for refusing to deny what she heard. She refused to deny her intuition, the messages she was receiving. Right? That's pure Gemini. Even the trial was Gemini. Her entire trial consisted of questioning, debate, right? Forced recantations, written testimony, and dozens of clerics tried to trap her through language. This is Saturn, Pluto, and Gemini at work. Power using words as weapons. Right? Yeah. So this is what I talk about. If you relate to being a past life Cathar, what I talk about in my video, the High Priestess in Hiding, is this is the wounding, is the voice for my fractal, right? So if you have throat problems or your voice is weak or you're terrified to speak in public, you're hold back truth, right? That's where this original wound comes from, right? And this is like disconnecting you from your own inner authority. Okay. And then let's look at her human design chart. There's Joan of Arc's human design chart. So 1412 to 1431. So she was a generator, a pure generator. And this isn't a spark that burns out with a pure generator, right? She wasn't a projector trying to convince people. Projectors didn't really come on the scene anyway until 1781, like the discovery of Uranus. So that was we're like the new, I'm a projector. We're the new types. We're like the babies of the human design family. So she didn't initiate from her mind. She initiated from something deep within her gut. That's what she initiated from. So, generator conviction, if you're a generator, you'll relate to this. It's terrifying. That energy is terrifying when it's clean, and it doesn't debate, it moves. It just moves. Um, she was a 1-3 profile. So this is not a blind believer, right? Line one is she needs a solid foundation, and she learns through trial and error as a third line. So this was a naive faith energy. She was like research, test, direct experience, fail, adjust, move again. So that fits with her reject it when she went to see the dolphin, right? Reject it over and over and over again. She wouldn't give up, right? This is the third line profile. Her incarnation cross was the right angle of penetration. And this isn't subtle. This is cutting through illusions. It's disrupting stagnation, like stuck energy. She enters systems and then she destabilizes them. That's her incarnation cross. That's exactly what she did. She didn't comfort France, right? What she did was she pierced through it. She pierced through the illusion. And then up here with the crown and the crown and ajna, she's got the 6447 channel. So the 64 is confusion, the 47 is realization. So this is processing chaotic energy into meaning. So this is visions, it's symbolic downloads, it's pressure to make sense of chaos, right? She did all that. So she wasn't hearing voices in a random way. Her mind was literally wired to take abstract confusion and then crystallize it, right? So that's mystical processing, right? That mystical, crystallizing that mystical energy with structure. And then at the bottom, she's got the 5342, right? So this is beginnings and completions. So she came to start something and to finish it. She wasn't here to sustain an empire. She wasn't here for sustainment, right? She wasn't here to manage the new bureaucracy in France. Hers was about initiate a cycle, complete the cycle, move on, like the SWAT team. She was in and out. This is why her life was so short, right? But the cycle completed what she came in and completed, right? 92 years the war was going on. She comes in, initiates, right? Initiates, completes the cycle. 22 years later, after her death, France is liberated, right? The king is crowned and the momentum shifted. And then she exited. This is the clean arc here. And then her motivation here is the third color. So this is desire. And it points to leader, right? Points to leader. So this desire is an egoic. It's not about ego, greed. It's about drive, right? It's about drive, and it's the hunger to improve something, right? So desire plus the generator energy. And the root pressure here is relentless, right? A relentless drive to improve something, to lead, exactly what she did. But if it's distorted, this desire can become obsession or martyrdom, right? And so this isn't like, oh, I want to lead. I'd really like to lead. Like it's no, right? This is about her frequency. So this is natural for her. It's a natural frequency for her to have that authority, right, within her aura. And people followed because her frequency is stable, right? And here she is. She doesn't have a defined throat, but yet she led. And that means it wasn't charisma. It was complete force, the force. And then her variables are DRL PLR. So this is mostly strategic left with receptive right. She's got two receptive rights here. So this is focused cognition, strategic processing, but perceptive environment intake. She'd be very receptive in taking. So she could absorb the field, but act with direction here. And then I'm going through this fairly quickly. Conscious sun is the 54-1 right there. This is ambition. So this is the drive to rise, and line 1 is a foundational ambition. So this isn't about social climbing. It's an inner drive to transform material reality. So paired with the 53.1 in the earth position, which is new beginnings. Remember back down here, new beginnings. It's powerful. She was literally here to start something new that elevates. And then her nodes, 55, 59.6. And look at that, eh? These are sleeping phoenix codes that are coming in 2027. So 55.6 is spirit, right? Spirit, 55 off the solar plexus. And line 6 is the role model. So this is her north node. This is the future orientation. So her trajectory was towards spiritual mutative energy. And then the 59 in the south node is intimacy, right? Intimacy, breaking barriers. And this is the role model that dissolves boundaries. So she disrupted social norms of dress, right? Clothing, gender roles, and hierarchy. There she is, the peasant girl, leading an army, leading nobles in the army. And now 2027, right? In 2027 coming up next year, it's not that far away, we're moving into this, right? This 55.6, this is a major theme. This right here, 55.6, is a major theme for 2027. So this trajectory has moved from the 1400s now until the 2027, right? 600 years. So her trajectory becomes collective trajectory. This is sleeping phoenix, spirit mutation, right? And then if we go on the other side with the red sun, survival intuition, 57.3. This is intuition coming from the body, but a test through experience. So the battlefield instinct, right, that she had. And then the red earth, 51.3, which is shock, right, is shock. 51 is initiation through shock. So she didn't gently enter and tiptoe into the timeline. She shocked the timeline, right, of the cross of consciousness that she was in. She shocked it. And then you can see that her, in terms of definition, the crown, the ajna, the sacral, and the root are defined. And then open is throat, G center, willpower center, solar plexus, and spleen. So the open G, right, is the identity is not fixed. It's not fixed. So she could step into an archetype without clinging to her personal self. She could step into that leader, right, the leader of the army, and without clinging to a personal self. Open willpower center, not driven by trying to prove her worth, right? Open solar plexus, not emotionally reactive. She could stand steady in intensity. That's powerful. So this chart is screaming pressure, vision, gut response, instinct, penetration, completion, and exit. See you later. Right? This is not a politician. It's not an empire builder. It's not an administrator. It's an initiator of cycles, and the Phoenix symmetry with the 55.6. This is really, really cool. So if you frame it right, this wasn't like she was special. Oh, Joan of Arc, she was so special. This is what happens when you're aligned with your design, right? With your unique design. She had her unique design. You're going to have your unique design. And that's the power when you're in alignment. You're in alignment with your soul, with your authenticity, and then the chart gets expressed, right? So you're going to have your own unique expression. So, an embodiment. She was the embodiment of this, right? Um, okay. And this, I just want to remind you, the 55 is going through a huge mutation, the 55 and the 59. And then midheaven, 25.6. That's her midheaven, the 25th gate, line 6. Right? So it's not activated here because the human design doesn't, the typical rave chart doesn't do that. But I like to look at the astrology because it gives us a lot more information. So with the 25, remember that's a lock. It's not naivete. It's cosmic innocence. And this is the willingness to act without personal agenda. And it's line 6. So her public destiny was anchored in innocence. And that's Joan of Arc. She didn't campaign. She didn't persuade. She didn't scheme. She didn't brand herself. She didn't even want any rewards at all from what she did. She acted with conviction without personal gain. And that's the 25. And Neptune, right? Neptune, remember Neptune and Saturn came into the 25th gate. They activated the 25th gate together. So Neptune dissolves like morality and right and agenda and outcomes and all that stuff. It dissolves all of that. And then Saturn tests the integrity. And 25 says, are you acting from integrity or are you acting from agenda? Do you have a hidden agenda while you're doing this? Right? I'm a spiritual person and I'm doing seva. Right? I'm doing seva. Why is it coming from an innocent place? Or it's because you want to look like you're a good person and you want accolades and validation for other people. This is what Saturn will be testing, right? Right now. So her public image, right? Her role model of divine innocence was under fire. And this was the wars, right? The war. So she wasn't fighting for ego. She was fighting because she believed that she was called. She was divinely called. And that's dangerous power, right? When it's like you have the God and the divine behind you. You're aligned with your soul purpose. So 25 in shadow can be the self-righteous crusader, the God told me delusion, right? The God told me to do this delusion. This is can be the martyr complex in shadow, but its gift is pure-hearted action without corruption. So Saturn in the 25th gate is an integrity test. Neptune in 25 is the disillusion of false spirituality. This is the energy that we're in right now. And Aries is act on it, right? The language of the Aquarian age is action. It's all about action. Does your action match, right, with what's going on inside you? Are you in integrity? Are you in coherence with your heart and soul, with your actions? So with Joan's public midheaven on the 25.6, the collective is about to run the Saturn Neptune through the 25, right? Okay. And if we look at, I want to look at something here. The other position I want to look at is the 11, which is really interesting. So that was up here off the Ajna, the 11th gate, line 1. This is really interesting because this is the 27.5 degrees Sagittarius. And if you know astrology, you know what that's about. That's about the galactic center, right? So astronomically, that region of the sky aligns with the galactic center. So when somebody has a strong 11, and look, it's in Mercury, right? 11 here. This is saying that this is the gate of ideas, but the ideas are larger than the personal mind. That's what this placement says. So gate 11 is not logic, it's imagery, it's the right brain, it's mythic thought, it's story transmission, and it's a central organizing intelligence because it's aligned straight with the galactic center. So this would say that ideas come from their downloads, right? They're coming from the divine, straight from the divine. And she spoke in vision. She spoke in vision, destiny, divine mandates, right? Soul calling, symbolism. And then she's got this 6447 up there. This is the pressure of confusion, the 64, the cosmic imagery. And if you know this, how the mind works with this channel here, it's like it's images. The mind just does its things, and it's like going through the Rolodex of images until it comes to clarity, to a crystallization, a realization, like a realization. And then you got Mercury in the 11 here. So you get imagery pressure here, mental processing with the 47, and then expressing the ideas, right? The idea articulation. Yeah. So her mind wasn't tactical, it wasn't strategic, it was symbolic. And symbolic speech moves people faster than strategy because it's touching them, right? It's touching the soul and the other. And this is why the armies followed her. Plus, she was a third color. So this galactic center, like an alignment with the galactic center, that she was in alignment with a larger pattern, not a personal pattern. In Sagittarius 11, this is about the future, right? It's about beliefs. The 11th gate is about beliefs. So, but it's future beliefs, right? So she didn't defend what was, she articulated what could be, right? She wasn't defending what was, she was articulating what could be. And this is Sagittarius energy at its highest expression, right? So it's really putting myth into action, right? And she was grounded, So this makes her very powerful, right? So some people think ideas change the world. They don't, right? Ideas are, if they're up here in the ideas, there's no motor, there's no action, right? Right? There's nothing going to happen if it's just ideas. So ideas don't change the world, right? Ideas embodied, right? Through service to taking action on the ideas. That's what changes the world, is taking action, is exactly what she did. It's just her architecture. So very mystical, right? Her chart. Okay. And then just another thing here is during her time, which is crazy, Saturn, Neptune, back to Saturn and Neptune. Saturn and Neptune were conjunct when she was 3 years old, right? So this is the Protestant Reformation period, spiritual awakenings, ideological revolutions. So she was like right in that energy. So the same planetary cycle that's today, but it's in a different sign. Saturn, Neptune, we're in the same time period now. So these cycles bring moments where the spirit challenges the authority of institutions. This is the spiritual war that we're in right now, right? And that's exactly what she did. And so this ties to the astrology because Saturn and Neptune were conjunct in Gemini, right, during her time. So Gemini energy was debate, like argument with the religious scholars, legal questioning, intellectual traps, persuasion. So her entire execution came, right? Execution came from word games and doctrine traps, not battlefield defeats, not with the swords and the weapons. The weapons were the words. So the English couldn't defeat her on the battlefield. So they moved the war into language. They moved the war into language, doctrine, interrogation, theology, right? But she spoke from the spirit, the purity of the spirit, the innocence, that 25th gate, right? And then we already talked about her the war being over 22 years later, right? Okay. Okay. So with Joan of Arc, the real lesson for today, to embrace this archetype is that she listened inwardly, she acted decisively, and she accepted consequences. That's integrity. So she didn't dilute her truth in order to survive, and that's rare, right? So this is you, right? If we look at, she embodied the healthy masculine within the female body. And this is the healthy masculine, is are you willing to act on what you know is true? That's the healthy masculine. Are you willing to act on what is true? Or are you wounded in that area? Is your inner masculine wounded? And it totally makes sense if it's wounded because of the 1989 collapse, the Neptune Saturn conjunct in Capricorn, that would be a wounding. That's the father wound, right? So is it can you act? Are you willing to act on what is is true? Even if the collective disagrees, even if your friends and family disagree. So what does the healthy inner masculine do? Protects your intuition, right? You stand by your knowingness, by your intuition. You take action when it's time. You don't collapse under pressure. You don't go and freeze, fight or flight or fawn, right? You take action when you're under pressure. You don't collapse. So there's clarity in action. So Joan of Arc reminds us that innocence is not weakness. Innocence is the courage to act from truth without being corrupted by fear. Right? So when Saturn and Neptune meet in Aries, they've already met in Aries, humanity is asked a similar question. Will you act from the authority of your own spirit or continue outsourcing it to these systems and institutions? Right? So if we look at these old keys, right? So remember that we're just looking at one lock, the lock of innocence. This never changes through all the global cycles that I talked about, but the keys do. So the 63 was the cross of consciousness, 1024 to 1614. The 63 opened this lock. This is the Cathar period. This was the mind. The mind was the key here. 63 is doubt, it's logic, it's proof. So if someone carried the 25, the innocence, the direct connection to the spirit, what did the world demand? They wanted argument. They wanted debate. They wanted doctrine proof. They wanted intellectual justification. In other words, you had to prove God through the mind, through your mind. And that's the trap that Joan walked into, right? So the court was full of these scholars, religious scholars, trying to logic her out of her experience. So their strategy was trap her in debate, and we can discredit the vision. But Joan didn't operate from the 63. She operated from direct knowing, the 25. And this made the system furious because the systems were built on mental authority. And they can't tolerate embodied spiritual authority. Still true to this day. The cross of planning, what we're in right now, since 1615 to 2027, well, it flipped over to the 37. So the last 400 years, the key became 37. This is tribe, it's loyalty, it's belonging. So the system was no longer asking, can you prove it logically? Instead, it is, are you loyal to the tribe? Are you loyal to these agreements? So the pressure then became family structure, staying in family structure, staying in the marriage, staying in relationship with the family of origin, even though you're the black sheep and they treat you like crap, right? You stay inside the church structure. You stay inside these social agreements. And so this meant, with the 25, the binary is exile or belong, right? Exile or belong. Exile or rejection. So many souls learned through cross of planning, the 37 here, if I speak my truth, I'll lose my tribe. I'll be kicked out of my tribe. And that carries the 5th chakra block, right? I can't speak the truth because I'll be kicked out of my tribe, right? That's the fear. So this is the trauma imprint, right? When people were executed for spiritual authority, right? Expressing their own inner authority, the body remembers. The nervous system remembers. Right? So the imprint becomes speaking truth equals danger, visibility equals persecution, leadership equals punishment. And this is why so many spiritually gifted people instinctively stay small, because there is a trauma from your past life that has wounded your inner masculine, right? That architecture is wounded within you, right? So now we've got Neptune, Saturn moved into Aries. It's activating this 25th lock again. And now the key 55 is going to be coming online very soon. It's like, what? Just adapt it to it now. We're already feeling it. This will no longer work. Sacrificing your authentic self to belong somewhere, no, it will no longer work. Right? So 25 is not mental, right? 63. It's not tribal, right? It's emotional. This is an emotional frequency. This is your feeling tone, This is your body, right? It's your body. So spirit moving through authentic feeling. The divine is a feeling, a presence. There's no argument. There's no belonging. I have to belong somewhere to access my spirit. It's all about frequency. It's about frequency. So the new code, right? 63 is prove it. 37 is belong. And the new system now is embody it. Now it's time to embody it. So the new keys, like you don't need to debate your truth. You don't need to defend your truth. You don't need permission to express your truth. You feel it and then you transmit it, right? Um, right? So this is about trusting your own inner signal. I have an inner signal. You have an inner signal. Now it's time to trust your inner signal. That's what this 55th key is saying. Right? Um, so, right? This would be like the 63 was like think, prove, survive. 37 is belong, conform, survive. The new world that's coming, embrace it now because it's going to be here very, very quickly. Your life will get much better if you embrace these new codes. And this is feel. The new world is feel, speak, evolve. Feel, speak, evolve. And 55 unlocks this gate 25 because the spirit is not proven or not proven or approved of. It's felt and then expressed, right? Okay. So what you got to trust, right? The key to truth now is frequency and what you trust. And when you trust what you feel in your body, the gate of innocence opens again. And this is your power. I did a whole video on innocence. This is not naivete, gullibility. This is your power. That's why there's such an attack on it in our world, right? Is our innocence. And we need to align with our innocence first, Saturn, Neptune in the 25th gate. And then we act from that place. Then we can protect the innocent and the ones that have no voice, right? But we need to align with our own innocence first, and that's the purity of our soul, purity of our hearts, right? So Joan of Arc, she really represents this 25 without asking for permission, and the world wasn't ready for her. But now the system's cracking, right? In a way that it wasn't in 1431. There's more of us, and the stage is different. And the new archetype doesn't have to die. Now it can be broadcast, right? Okay. So what's the new, right? The new Joan of Arc, right? So humanity's been on this threshold before, and again we're in this threshold, right? So in many ways, the time we're entering now echoes the world that Joan of Arc was born into. The world's filled with uncertainty, disillusionment, and despair. The world is filled with conflict. And the world where the future looked unstable and unpredictable. And in times like these, most people will contract, right? They shrink. They choose fear. They cling to the old structures that are already collapsing. They dim their light because standing in truth suddenly feels dangerous. But in this moment in history is not the time to contract. It's not a time to make yourself smaller. It's not a time to abandon your faith in divine intelligence that's moving through your life right now. This is the time to expand. Commit to expand, and it's a time to align with your soul. It's a time to act from love, right? Rather than fear. That's what's real. So Joan of Arc represents that polarity, right? She was the polarity of what the energy that she was in. She lived in a world where almost everyone around her believed deeply that defeat was inevitable. But she aligned herself with something deeper than the fear of her time. She aligned herself with what she knew to be true. And that's the archetype that we're stepping into now. The world is filled with people responding from fear, closing down, shrinking their lives, clinging to their material things, right? Losing hope. But the invitation of this new cycle is the opposite. It's asking each one of us to become the spiritual warrior, right? Not the spiritual warrior. Not a warrior of anger, not a warrior of ideology, but a warrior of innocence. And that's the frequency of gate 25. And innocence doesn't mean naive. It means being aligned with something pure within you. Alignment with the divine intelligence that moves through life itself. Right? So Saturn and Neptune together in Aries, right? I'm going to just like go on and on about this transit. It's a huge transit. It's saying something to humanity. It's saying act from your soul, even when fear is present, even when the path isn't completely clear, because the real battle is not outside of you, right? It's always been within. That's your real battle. Microcosm, macrocosm. Change doesn't happen until you heal the microcosm, right? And you realize that this external world is just a mirror of what's going on in the collective unconscious of humanity. So contraction versus expansion, fear versus trust. And the world we see around us is simply the mirror of that inner choice, the choices that we're making, each human is making right now. So no shrinking, and it's time to double down. Put all your chips on the roulette wheel, put all your chips on the divine, and live your life as if the alignment actually matters, because it does, right? We've been in the Kali Yuga, right? This is the era of Yuga of cycle, right? Era of darkness. This is the age where the connection to the divine has been obscured. It's been blocked. We've been blocked to our divine nature, not destroyed. It hasn't been destroyed. It's just been forgotten. It's been forgotten. And during this long cycle, many people have turned away from that connection. They turned away from God and the divine. They chose fear. They chose their ego. They chose their fear over faith. They chose the safety of the ego over the uncertainty of the soul. They chose control instead of trust. And little by little, humanity began to live if it were separate from the divine. This is what we're seeing out in the world. People are living. This is why horrific things happen, because people are living as if they're not connected to the divine, right? They're living as if they're separate from the divine. But the separation was always the illusion, because the truth is you were never separate, not for a moment. It's about turning now back towards the light, who you truly are. It's time to come home, right? We're walking back home, home to the divine, home to the deeper intelligence that's always lived within your own being. That essence, your authentic self, has never disappeared. It's simply been waiting for you to finally drop the ego and turn around and go to your true self, your authenticity. Right? And that remembering begins inside each one of us. We've just forgotten. And every time we choose love instead of fear, those little choices you make during the day, right? Am I walking towards the divine, or am I walking towards fear? And every time you act from truth instead of survival, every time you trust the deeper voice within, that's the movement back towards the light. That's the return. And that's the path that's opening up for us now, right? Okay. So, be the modern Joan of Arc, right? The modern Joan of Arc right here with the phoenix, embracing the phoenix, speaking the truth. Commit to yourself. I'm going to start to speak the truth, right? My truth. And the throat chakra, your fifth chakra, will start to clear. That fear will diminish more and more. The more that you align with your truth and you actually speak it and express it, it's going to clear. It will get, that signal will get stronger and stronger. And especially when you start to act on it, when you start to act on your truth, it will get even more and more strong, right? So that's what I have for the Phoenix Files for Joan of Arc. And let me know if you have any suggestions, historical figures, or even present day people that you feel are deserving of the word Phoenix. I have a few more in mind, but I want to continue this series because it's really interesting to look at their human design chart and then where they fit, what cycle they fit into, right? Especially the ones that just, like, she's a myth now, right? With Joan of Arc, and she lived such a short life. Okay. So just a reminder, you can follow me on Instagram, Telegram, and YouTube, where I post daily. Okay, and let me know if you've enjoyed this series and you would like me to continue. Okay, Sat Nam Aloha, everyone. Bye bye.